Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Clist Fons, and I'm a leadership and team coach. I'm with Wysteria Coaching and Consulting, and I've had a long history of working with the Wisconsin Counties Association, and I'm really excited to be here today and share some of the insights that I hope will be helpful to all of you as we struggle to deal with some of the new frontiers, in particular virtual everything. And I want to take a minute especially to thank Anne-Marie for helping me get this out to all of you. Anne-Marie is truly a master at the behind the scenes technology and making all of this work. And in full disclosure, that's a very special talent and skill set that is not one of my gifts. And it's massively important to successful virtual team meetings. And technology came up in a few of the responses you all shared. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have someone within your team who can master the technology and execute it with skill and grace. So I just want to put that out there. This is not a technology how-to today. This is more about how to structure meetings and how to work together. So the people portion, if you will. And I want to take a minute to welcome all of you. We had over 100 people register for this afternoon from all over the state with different roles within their county or their organization. And what that means is that you'll all be experiencing team meetings in different ways, and you'll have different responsibilities. So I may not hit everything for everyone, but I think all of you will walk away with some things that you can act on immediately. So you were all muted when you entered the webinar. And if you want to ask a question, just toss it up into the Q&A. And at the end, Anne-Marie will help us go through all of those, and we'll see what we can address. So just walking through really quick what we'll take a look at today. I'm going to start by laying some of the groundwork for you about what it takes to be a high-performing team and where meetings, and in this case virtual meetings, fit into that, the recipe and the mixture. We're all learning how to do things differently. We're all trying to be more effective and more efficient. And we'll talk about what is and isn't normal in meetings, and whether we want to admit the truth of those things or not. And then some of the challenges we're facing and what can be done to mitigate those. Again, we'll end with Q&A, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and what it is that I do to help support leaders and teams be more successful. I have been so lucky to study under author and consultant David Clutterbuck, who is one of the leading minds in management and organizational development. And my approach to working with teams is based on his research. So we're not going to do a deep dive into this, but this model does show 6 key attributes that are integral to how a team functions. And as you're looking at this, I hope it'll jump out to you that leadership is at the bottom. It's the foundation on which all these other attributes rest upon. And when I say leadership, I don't mean your county executive, and I don't mean your CEO. I mean, as a whole, the leadership competencies and expectations of leadership skills for the entire team. Everyone takes responsibility for being all in and leading the team going forward. So having that solid foundation really is key. So you'll see learning, relationships, purpose and motivation, internal processes, how we do things and how we do them together, and then external processes, how we do things with our stakeholders and how those connections. And then again at the bottom, leadership. And all of these attributes are completely interconnected. So learning impacts purpose and motivation, and external processes impact learning and relationships, and so on. So they all create this web, if you will, and like a spider, when it strums on any one strand of its web, the entire thing vibrates. And you can't tweak one without it impacting all the others, for good or bad. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. Like I said, we're not going to do a big scale deep dive, but zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to do it step by step so I don't lose you. I wanted to look at relationships, and I picked this one because right now so much of our lives is playing out through virtual relationships, personally and professionally. So in this part of the model, you see relationships connecting with internal processes, external processes, purpose and motivation, and leadership. And then if we take it one step further, zooming in a little bit more and focusing on just two of those strands in the web. So relationships with purpose and motivation, and relationships with internal processes. And remembering that all of those other connections and strands are still tangled in there. We can't separate them. So to kind of lay this out for you, I want you to imagine for a second that your team has these great trust-based relationships, and you all have a very clear idea of what the purpose of your team is. You all recognize that each individual's contribution is in service to that team purpose. And then you have a team that everyone has bought in. Everyone's excited. Everyone's working enthusiastically toward the goal. I mean, yay. And maybe this is your team. But if we take one small tweak to our imaginary team here, and they all like each other, they all trust each other and enjoy working with each other, but a few people on the team have a different idea about what the end goal is, or maybe just completing their role is their primary purpose, not the overall team purpose. So without that clearly agreed upon purpose, suddenly you have a team who on the surface seems great. Everyone's happy, stuff's getting done, but it's disjointed and people are pursuing their own agenda. And so if you take that same team that gets along really well and they clearly understand their role and how that fits into the greater purpose and the value, and they clearly understand how the role of others fits into everyone else and the processes in place that connect them. And they acknowledge the value and importance of everybody's process and connection, so no one is less than. Then you have a team with this high level of psychological safety, and it creates the space for constant evaluation. And what I mean by that is this questioning of what it is that we're doing. And it's these questions that helps a team to thrive and strive forward. Because it's safe to be in constant evaluation, an organization can pivot quickly and it can be more innovative. And not just for their stakeholders and what they need now, but for what the stakeholders need in the future. But if that team doesn't have a strong foundation of trust, if there's a culture of CYA, cover your backside, or people feel like they're competing with each other, then you can be left with the team that avoids interfering, which may sound blissful, but then people avoid interfering even when they recognize an obvious issue, an issue that can be wasted energy, unmet goals, or become a really big problem. And this is just a laser tight look at a couple of common ways that a team can function limping along, maybe still getting things done, or they can all come together and be highly effective. And where virtual meetings come into all of this is communication. And it's what communication is, what we spin out between each other. It's the connection between each other. It's how we identify and normalize behaviors. And it's how we build each of the threads in our web. So meetings are the perfect playground for these 6 attributes to play out, and a place to see how to start doing things differently. So I want to take just a minute and talk about normal and what's normal in meetings. A 2017 Harvard Business Review article cited that more than half of all mid-level remote workers spend 15 to 20% or 15 to 20 hours per week in virtual meetings in 2017. And for the most part, we're now all virtual. And I'm here to tell you that this number has gone way up. This is based on my one data point. In the makeshift office next to me, my husband is director of continuing ed at UW-Whitewater. And now that he's home and working, I hear him and see him regularly, and he spends easily 75% of his time in meetings. And we often have these conversations about how do you do your job when you're constantly meeting about your job. And in defense of meetings as a necessity, a lot of the doing can happen in meetings, but we often spend so much time talking about the doing that we're short on time and stressed by the time we get around to the doing. And what I find even more scary is research that shows that only 23% of managers give their full attention in virtual meetings. And I don't know if you can see the tiny citation on the bottom of the screen, but this research is from 2010. So that may have been a virtual meeting in your office with someone else in their office. And now you have people doing it from their homes. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that percentage of focused managers has gone down considerably. And if you stop and think about who you are in a meeting, are you one of those very few, or is this your normal? And if you take a minute and be honest with me, or be honest with yourself, how focused are you right now? So some of the challenges that happen that I've heard from the teams that I work with and that came up in some of the responses that you guys shared, starting with lack of preparation. In order to have a virtual meeting go smoothly, there are so many more details that need to be considered than in an in-person meeting. In order for virtual meetings to be effective, all the moving parts need to be considered. So that comes to distractions. The amount of distractions now that we have surrounding us has expanded exponentially. So there's so many more opportunities to be looking at your cell phone, which I have sitting on my desk, or Facebook, Snapchat, all those other tabs you have up on your screen, analyzing financial records or looking at a spreadsheet, whatever it is that you're trying to do all at once. And our brain only has so much capacity to focus. So if you're looking at a spreadsheet, you may only be picking up every other word or every 3 words, just sort of waiting for that one word that's going to snap you back to the conversation. Technology, another challenge. does everyone have it? Do they know how to use it? What's your plan for who will speak when? That was another message that came up when you guys were responding. And while this is all part of technology and that it all needs to be considered ahead of time in that preparation, it also needs to be managed during the meeting. And I'm going to give you an example that Anne-Marie shared with me as we were getting ready for this. She was talking about the annual meeting for the Counties Association that she put together for all of you, and I hope that I'm getting this right. But she had to, over the weeks ahead of time, record all of those sessions and piece all of those videos together with all of the appropriate breaks for all of your Q&As. As you guys went through it virtually synchronously, the videos were done asynchronously well beforehand. So it takes a lot more work. And the lack of follow through, I don't know if you guys are noticing it, but I'm seeing it consistently with some of the teams that I'm coaching, and that there's less action being taken following virtual meetings. The disconnected nature of communication at a distance, it separates someone from the emotional commitment to complete whatever that action is. And I will just end with that meetings are too long virtually. And we've all been in those meetings where our brains have to work harder. It's more difficult to process nonverbal cues like tone and body language. The delays in sound with the muting and the unmuting can feel frustrating and disjointing. And then there's this phenomenon of Zoom fatigue, which is a very real thing. So there's all of these new challenges that we're facing when it comes to trying to do virtual meetings. So what can we do about that? And there's a lot. The biggest one is preparation. A good amount of this actually relates to in-person meetings, but virtual meetings are far less forgiving when it comes to preparation if it isn't done thoroughly. So this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list, but I'd like to suggest to you that you answer a few questions in that process and planning before a meeting. And the first one is, what's the purpose of your meeting? Is it decision making? Is it reporting, issue reporting? Is it information exchange? And how will that impact the structure of your time and your agenda? And then what are the objectives to reach by the end of your meeting? What do you want to accomplish? And if it isn't a clear-cut answer this question, answer that question, how will you know that you actually accomplished it? Is it a feeling? Is it an agreement from everyone? But planning these things and deciding them ahead of time gives you a lane to operate in and to create that structure for the meeting. Another question is, who actually needs to be there? We're all in so many meetings. So are you just inviting everybody because you always invite everybody? And meetings are zero sum. Once that time's gone, you never get that back. So who actually has to be there? And then can someone participate halfway? Is it acceptable for members to read or send emails when they're in the meeting? What about stepping away to take a phone call? The cameras need to be on. Do you have to see everyone's face? And there's good and bad to all of these things. It's not that one is always right over another. It's taking the time beforehand to intentionally select what is most beneficial rather than just running on autopilot that we were able to do when we were all together. And then what can be done to ensure that participants can make the best use of their time in the meetings? So clearly communicate with each member what you expect them to do beforehand. Are there materials to be read that you have to make sure that you send out? You want them to come to the meeting with questions or concerns or ideas. If you tell them ahead of time what you need and are very clear that you expect that to be in place, then it takes a lot of the bumps out and a lot of the wasting time as people are trying to read whatever it is that you just shared with them. And as you're planning what time and how long, can you avoid meal times, all of these little logistics of like the convenience to all of your members. It seems like a tiny detail, but if you guys are working with constituents out in your communities, then dinner time is probably a really bad time. So it's just, again, it's the preparation and those minor things. What are the agenda topics? Are they flexible or are they firm? And then if you mark each agenda topic with a specific time and then ask yourself, have you allotted the right amount of time, an appropriate and realistic amount of time? And then do you need to schedule breaks in there? If these are long meetings, and sometimes I know that local government meetings, which I'm pretty sure impacts all of you, those can be some beastly long meetings. Do you have the ability to schedule breaks in there? Who will facilitate? Who will watch the time? And how will you close a topic if it's running long and you have to move on? Who's going to take notes? Will you record it? And I would end this with, be prepared for all of your preparation to totally fall apart. Technology. When we started, I mentioned how very grateful I was to Anne-Marie for all her help in setting up the technology for today. She taught me several things that made this so much easier. I can't emphasize enough how beneficial it is to have someone on your team who knows the ins and outs of technology and who will look into finding ways to do something that you've never done before. What we have available to us in technology is changing every single day. So this isn't a static, I know how to do this. It's a role that actually needs to be willing to continue to learn and look for options for you so you can remain highly nimble and highly functional. One of the questions that came up is open and closed sessions. How do you do that virtually in some of your meetings? And my familiarity with Zoom, I would recommend, and it's not the end all be all, but what I would recommend is that the people that you have that need to be in the closed session, you ahead of time in preparation, set up a small group room and assign them to that room. So when it's time for closed session, those people automatically get moved into that room. And then everyone else can still hang out in that public room, and you don't have to worry about a constituent who's not good with technology logging off and figuring out how to log back in. And then when closed session is over, when that private session's done, you can bring those members back. And it's a way to just utilize the technology you have, and I would assume that it's going to get better and better over time. So there might be even more ways to operate this to engage people publicly and privately. Oh, sorry, deep breath. I feel like I'm kind of ripping through all of this really quickly. I want to acknowledge that there are some challenges that are beyond the meeting and are actually systemic challenges. If you're bringing community members into your meeting, you can't control the equipment they have or how reliable their connection is. You cannot directly control how competent they are in using technology. There are larger issues at play that can't be solved in this webinar and probably can't be solved by any small changes within your areas. But one thing that may help with some of those issues is to actually not overdo the technology. Does your meeting have to have video? If the web, your internet access is weak in some areas of your community, then having it on video makes it worse. Is there a way to streamline the technology down so that you increase accessibility for everybody? So sometimes with technology, less is better. And your expectations, don't expect people to leave and then to come back. Don't expect them to move themselves into a breakout room. And some other things to keep in mind that maybe you could do is offer a tech training in advance. And these are bigger things, they're just options to throw out there. Maybe you can have someone manning a telephone line to help walk through some of those challenges, keeping in mind that this should not be someone who needs to actively participate in the meeting. So just there's a lot, and it's complicated for all of you. And I guess I just really wanted to acknowledge all of that. That I don't believe that this is going to be a silver bullet for you. So a couple of other things though with technology that you can do or think about is, do you need to, if there's more than one speaker, do you need to plan for pauses between them? How are you going to handle the muting and unmuting? When you guys all came in, you were muted, and we're going to save Q&A to the end and probably keep you on mute, but that's not always an option. So do you have a moderator in place? Are you going to allow people to unmute themselves? Do you have someone, and I really recommend this, that it is their primary purpose to monitor the chat and the Q&A? So technology is this silver bullet or the gun that kills you, which I thought was really funny when I heard that somewhere else. But it's just important to know that at some point, technology is going to fail you. So do the best you can with what you have, and truly be ready to roll with it. With trust and culture, this goes back to your team and how they relate to each other, the strands of that web. There's no easy check boxes to building a strong team, but it's a great place to start when it comes to meetings, is to start with being really clear. So when you answer all of those questions in preparation, and in technology, share that out with your meeting participants. Let them know what you expect they will accomplish before the meeting. Be clear about how you want them to participate. Share how you will close out that topic if it's time to move on. All of these things as surprises for people in a meeting can break down trust. It can create confusion. Acknowledge distractions and put it out there. Is it okay to multitask, or is this one of those small team meetings where you need everybody 100% in? And definitely explain how you're going to moderate the flow of conversation. Do you want people to just start talking? That can be really hard with all of the sound breaks. Someone starts and the delay, someone else starts, and then we stop, and it's this back and forth jerky thing. Do you want to have a moderator call on people? If you call it out ahead of time, that this is the way we're going to do it, then people know that I can wait my turn. Everyone's going to go around, or I put my name in the Q&A chat and I'm going to get called on. So they don't get anxious about, I'm not going to have my chance to share. So communicating out what to expect is the one area in meetings that you can start to build that trust with your culture. And we talked about the lack of follow through. So this is going to commitment. The lack of follow through that happens in virtual meetings if you take the time at the end of the meeting to have each person actually say out loud what their actions are after the meeting. Verbalizing something in the form of a commitment increases a person's sense of responsibility to that commitment by 200%. That's huge. Just by us saying it out loud, our brains connect to that with greater responsibility. And it eliminates confusion if you just say it again. So what else can you do? You can stay disciplined. When you communicate expectations, stick with those. Talk about the ground rules again at the opening of a meeting, especially if you anticipate it's going to be a rough one. With all of the added stress that we're under and all of the distractions swirling around us, reminders are not just important, they're comforting, because then we all know exactly where we're at. Always start a meeting on time and end them on time, and shoot for early ending if you can. This discipline to the times, again, helps people establish their expectations. And here's a tip. If you're facilitating the meeting and there's an awkward silence, use it. If you can sit it out, silence compels people to speak up. It also gives people time to think, if that's how they process. And virtually, the silence can feel even longer than an in-person meeting. So I would encourage you to use it, try it, watch the clock if you need to, start with 30 seconds or 45 seconds and see if you can get it up to 2 minutes as a way to sort of spur your team to participate if you have one of those teams that sits back and doesn't respond, or to give space. You can even call out the silence and say, we're going to just take a couple minutes for everybody to process this, and then we're going to go around and share whatever it is that needs to be shared. Looking in the mirror, I would say that everything starts with the manager, the director, the executive. If you're the one who's on Facebook during a meeting, your employees will too. If you're constantly running late, your people will not respect time. If you're curt and impatient, your people will think these are accepted behaviors. And if you're genuinely paying attention, if you're really there and valuing what people bring to the table, your people will too. It's just the way that we all follow each other. How the leader behaves is how we're going to behave. That's establishing the norms. And the last thing that I'm going to suggest, and recognizing that this might not be the right fit for all of your meetings, especially ones that are open to the public, but most of the teams that I work with have found that the check-in and check-out has significant impact on people's attitudes in meetings before, during, and after. So the check-in is the time to acknowledge that we're all human beings. It's an opportunity for vulnerability, and it facilitates trust and stronger relationships in your team. So here's how it looks. Each person says how they are in the moment. And I suggest you limit it to like 3 to 5 words, otherwise it can take up too much time. But it could be as simple as someone saying major deadlines, sick kid, new grandbaby, broken air conditioner. All of these things are just a glimpse into how someone else is right now, and perhaps will give us a little more patience and understanding. And it's just a way to build relationship and to connect. When we're not face to face, we're all asking, how do we connect? And the biggest thing that we can do to remain connected and to remain in these relationships is to give space for being human and being vulnerable together, whether that's in good things or in celebrations or in the painful things. And going back to look in the mirror, as a leader, you're the one who needs to be the example of vulnerability before your people will follow suit. The check out, I like it in conjunction with that commitment to tasks. And this is the chance for your people to reflect on where they are now at the end of the meeting as a professional. So start as here I am as the human being, and here I am as the professional. And it gives them a chance to say how they're feeling about the meeting and what they need to do. There can be something like, I think we found some great solutions to our problem, and I'm gonna complete X, Y, and Z by Tuesday at 3 p.m. Or I'm still a little concerned about the status of 1, 2, 3. I don't have any actions related to our meeting today, but right now my main priorities are this and that. And that's all it takes to connect and build relationships as professionals. And it's another opportunity to restate what needs to get done for that added commitment. And I know that all of this that I've thrown at you can seem like a lot. It can feel exhausting. We're not used to operating this way. We're doing everything differently, and we need to start thinking about everything differently. So the last bit of advice that I would actually share with all of you is to just be patient with yourself and be patient with each other as we grow and learn how to do this in a very different way. And remembering that all of us have different emotions behind how we feel about this. Maybe you love being at home, maybe you hate being at home, maybe it's more stressful, maybe you're worried about losing your job. All of these things, because of why we're connecting virtually and the fact that we are, underlie everything. So when you stay consistent, when you repeat expectations, when you connect at that human and vulnerable level, when you restate the I commit to doing X, this creates, as best as I have seen out there, the maintaining of relationships that we had when we could do it all together. So remember that the success of meetings is impacted by all of the strands in your team's web. So it takes agreed upon norms and commitments to get really deep into good meetings. If you all are going to respect each other's values and opinions, even if you disagree, that takes a lot of deep, rich, hard work. And it could mean culture change. And that's the sort of thing that takes time. It takes a lot of groundwork. It takes a lot of commitment. And so a checklist can't fix that. But this is the kind of work that I do with my clients, helping them look at all of those strands in their web and working to strengthen those attributes. Whew. So now I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to use a little bit of silence and give you all a minute to gather your thoughts. And then Anne-Marie can maybe pop on and sort of help me pull out some questions that might have come up.
Hi, Kim. I do have one question that came, well, I had two.
Okay.
One of them for all of the attendees, I did answer it. I provided a link, and the question was asking for more clarification on how to create separate rooms.
Oh, great.
And I put in there a video tutorial on how to create a virtual breakout room, but please note this is in Zoom. So every platform is different. We are using Zoom today, so I just provided a tutorial for Zoom. The next question is from Megan, and she's asking, how do you see this working out with elected officials?
That's an interesting question, in that I wonder what is different about elected officials. I do understand that the meetings that you have in government often will have public interaction or you may have Robert's rules that dictate things. But elected officials still can create a team, and the connection to each other and how you work together. So it's a matter of what's valued, and trying to work to find that common groundwork where everyone's respected. I guess I hope I'm answering that. I'm not sure, and maybe whoever asked it could give me a little bit more information about what makes the role of an elected official different.
Sure, Megan, if you want to clarify verbally, if you just press on that raised hand button, I can unmute you if that's helpful.
Ooh, but we'll hear someone's voice.
We'll move on to Dawn until then. Dawn is asking, what is culture taint?
Ooh.
T-A-I-N-T.
I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay.
I'm wondering if in all of my talking, if I said something that sounded like taint when maybe it was like culture change, or I'm not familiar with culture taint. I do know, I mean, you can have a poisonous or toxic culture, and that can look a lot of different ways, with mistrust and people not depending on each other, everybody pulling in different directions, information hoarding. But I'm not familiar with culture taint.
All right, we're gonna unmute Megan. Megan, you're unmuted if you want to expound a little bit.
Hi, Megan.
Sure. Hi, thanks for doing this, Kim. It's been great hearing everything that you've had to say. So I'm an elected official. I sit on a county board. But how would you suggest a county board and county board members build trust with each other in this time of not necessarily always meeting in person? There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and we all have different ideas on how we'd like to get things done, but there's also quite a few new board members. So how would you suggest building that foundation of leadership, and B, building up that trust, especially with new board members?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things to establish is purpose. And maybe it's, granted, elected officials can feel like they have very conflicting purposes, but maybe if you're coming together around an issue in a meeting, what is the purpose right now? And if there's a breakdown, one of the biggest shifts or changes that I see happening is when that breakdown is no longer a person, but a process. So it's not, you didn't do this, it's this didn't happen. So when your leadership, when you have more senior elected officials who are taking sort of that forward step in how we talk about things, that can create the space where people start to feel more trust. So it doesn't mean ignoring that something didn't happen, and that something has to be addressed, and that it's not okay that it didn't happen. But what it means is that it's not a flaw in that human being. And when you can make that shift, and everyone can start to adopt that language, and again, this is not a fast switch you can flip, but when you start to do that, then people start to trust that they can talk about something that goes wrong. If I send out an email that it has wrong information in it, which I've done, and it feels lousy. So the email had poor communication. I am not a flawed emailer. Probably not the best at it, but that's beside the point. I hope this is kind of getting at what you're asking. It's, I think when you talk about elected officials and where we're at right now as a society, it's really, really hard. But if you have a group of people coming together that actually want to work on this, then there's room for change to happen. And that's the kind of thing that team coaching or a consultant can do for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And while we're on the Megan question, we did have just some feedback saying, great question, Megan. We've had these challenges as well in our county. So thank you for that question. And then Kim, if it's okay, we'll move on to Robert. He wishes to ask a question as well. And Robert, I've unmuted you. You can go ahead.
Hey, Robert.
And Robert, you'll have to unmute yourself on your end if you wish to speak. Okay. We have another question from Patricia, and she says, I've noticed that we get much less input from attendees during virtual meetings than we used to in person. Any suggestions for getting more input?
Two things that come to mind. One is to prepare them ahead of time. What is it that you're going to be looking for input on? And clearly state that when you come to the meeting, we want you to share this input. So it's about clarity of expectations ahead of time. I also think that part of it is the distractions. So if we're in a virtual meeting, I'm again halfway there, I'm mostly listening, but I may not have heard everything you're talking about, so I don't feel comfortable sharing my input. And so I would try and have a conversation around, this is a meeting where we all need to come together. So if you all wouldn't mind closing your extra windows and putting your phone on a separate table so we can all really dig in here. And it's calling it out. And I know that there will be people who will push back and think, you can't tell me what to do, or don't treat me like a child. But it doesn't change the fact that these problems are clearly happening. I mean, one more thing that you can do is use that silence. If you are waiting for input and it's hard to wait, one of the things that I started doing, and as I set my hands on the table and I just start tapping my fingers and counting, and if I can tap my fingers and get to 100, then I might step in and alleviate that silence. But there's a pressure, an actual like compellingness to silence. So I would toss that out there.
All right, and we have one last question. So I'll just remind people while we're addressing this, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and type it in the Q&A panel, or if you're on the phone, which I see we have some on the phone, just press *9 and I'll unmute you. Our question from Joan or Joanne is, what does a county board supervisor do if there is a reluctance of other supervisors to meet virtually?
Perhaps it is asking them what they believe the other options are. So if they don't want to meet virtually, and bringing those concerns out there. So I'm going to make an assumption here that perhaps people don't want to meet virtually, they want to meet in person, and there are concerns right now about the health and safety of a meeting in person. So maybe it's asking them, we need to meet. How do you suggest that we do this and honor the concerns for other people's safety? And I feel like I'm stating the obvious in so many ways, but we don't call these things out and we don't genuinely ask. So here's something, and I'm going to ask you just to listen to it. If I said to you, so what do you think we should do? Or if I say, I hear you, so what do you think we could do? It's tone, but that tone changes the way that person's going to receive that question. So you have to think about how you're reacting to their stance, and then realign how your response is going to sound. There's some of these, it's just, there may not be answers to everything. It's not hard and fast. And We are a stubborn species.
So Kim, we don't have any more questions, but Megan did comment, great question. And she said, we are seeing that here and there are lots of concerns here. I feel like there isn't a middle ground with that. It's all or nothing because we voted on it. So a little bit of feedback to that question.
Yeah, so hard.
Well, we don't have any more at this time.
Okay. So in an attempt to end early, which that's a good thing, I'll just start with, we crammed a lot in here today, and we really only touched on a tiny bit of the dynamics that leaders and teams deal with. I've been working in leadership development with individuals and groups for over 15 years. The Lions portion of that with the University of Wisconsin doing leadership development. And it's my passion to empower people to achieve and to help teams come together so that they can accomplish far greater things than they can on their own. So if you want to know more about me and about leadership coaching or team coaching and how that can work for all of you, reach out. I've worked out some really reasonable rates. I know that local government right now is hurting. So I think that we are all in this together, and I want to help everyone succeed. So I hope I have a chance to talk to you. I don't, Anne-Marie, do you have anything else?
Just one last thing, a comment came in or a question asking about a copy of this webinar, and I've replied, but I'll say it publicly. We are recording this, and so we will post this to the WCA website under webinars. And then Kim, by all means, you're welcome to push out any information you want to the email lists that that I sent you. But just so everybody knows, you will have a copy of this recording on our website.
Awesome. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. I don't know where you are in the state, but it's going to be a toasty one where I'm at. So stay cool and have a good one.